A dialogue with parents. What future for the children of homosexual couples? A hopeful outlook. Emma stood at the front of the packed auditorium, her hand steady despite the hostile energy radiating from certain sections of the crowd, knowing that what she was about to say would either change minds or harden them further. But she had not come this far, had not survived conversion therapy and family rejection and building a beautiful life with her wife Sarah and their twin daughters, to stay silent when the school board was debating whether children of same-sex couples should be allowed to speak about their families in class, whether books depicting LGBTQ families should remain in the library, whether her daughters deserved the same recognition and protection as their classmates. And as she approached the microphone, she thought of Maya and Zoe doing homework at the kitchen table, unaware that their futures were being debated by strangers who had never met them, who saw them as symbols rather than the brilliant, kind, curious 8-year-olds they were. The journey to this moment had begun 15 years earlier, when Emma first kissed another girl behind the gymnasium of her high school in suburban Dallas, the world tilting on its axis as everything suddenly made sense. Why she had never felt what her friends described when they talked about boys. Why she had practiced kissing her pillow, imagining it was her best friend Melissa. Why she had felt like she was performing a role rather than living her truth. And that kiss, brief and terrified and perfect, had set her on a path that would lead through years of hiding and shame and therapy designed to fix her through the devastating rejection by her evangelical parents, who told her she was choosing hell over heaven, through nights sleeping in her car during college because she had nowhere else to go, through the slow, beautiful process of building a chosen family of other LGBTQ people who understood what it meant to be cast out for loving who you loved. Meeting Sarah at a graduate school orientation had felt like coming home to a place she had never been. This woman, with the infectious laugh and brilliant mind, who was studying child psychology, while Emma pursued her education degree. Both of them passionate about creating better futures for young people, and their first conversation lasted until campus security kicked them out of the building, talking about everything from pedagogical theory to their favorite movies to their coming out stories, finding in each other not just attraction but recognition, understanding the possibility of building something together that neither had dared to imagine during their closeted teenage years. And by the end of that first semester, they were inseparable, studying together in the library, cooking dinners in Sarah's tiny apartment. Slowly letting their guards down and allowing themselves to believe that happiness might actually be possible. The decision to have children had not been made lightly. Both of them, understanding the challenges their kids would face, the questions they would have to answer, the prejudice they might encounter, but also knowing that they had so much love to give that they could create a home where children would be celebrated for exactly who they were, where difference was not just tolerated but embraced as beautiful, where the values of empathy and justice and authenticity would be lived daily. And after years of planning and saving and navigating the complex world of fertility treatments and sperm donors and legal protections, they held their newborn daughters for the first time. Maya and Zoe, perfect and tiny and theirs. And Emma had never felt more powerful or more vulnerable than in that moment, understanding that she was now responsible for protecting these innocent lives in a world that did not always welcome families like theirs. Those early years were a blur of diapers and sleepless nights, and first words and steps, the normal chaos of raising twins made more complex by the constant need to advocate for their family from the pediatrician, who kept asking which one was the real mother, to the daycare forms that only had space for one female parent, to the playground conversations where other parents stumbled over how to refer to Sarah and Emma. And through it all, they held firm to their commitment to raise their daughters with pride in their family age, appropriately explaining that some families had a mommy and daddy, some had 2 mommies or 2 daddies, some had one parent or grandparents or other configurations, that what made a family was love and commitment and showing up for each other every single day. The girls grew into curious, confident children who asked endless questions about everything, from why the sky was blue to why some people thought their family was wrong, and Emma and Sarah navigated each conversation with care, never lying, but also protecting their daughter's innocence as long as possible, explaining that some people were still learning about different kinds of families, that change took time, that their job was to be kind and patient, while also standing up for what was right. And Maya and Zoe absorbed these lessons with the matter-of-fact acceptance of children who had never known anything but love and security, who took their family structure for granted the way their classmates took their heterosexual parents for granted. Starting kindergarten had been the first real test Emma and Sarah, carefully choosing a school known for its diversity and inclusion, meeting with the principal and teachers before the school year to discuss their family, providing resources and offering to help educate staff, and mostly it went smoothly, the twins making friends, easily excelling academically. Their artwork of their family displayed on the walls alongside everyone else's. But there were moments that broke Emma's heart, like when Maya came home confused because a classmate had told her she couldn't have two moms, that it was impossible, or when Zoe was excluded from a birthday party because the parents didn't want to explain their family to the other children. Each incident a reminder that no matter how far society had come, their daughters would always have to navigate spaces where their very existence was questioned. Emma threw herself into advocacy at the school, joining the PTA, volunteering for every field trip and class party, making sure other parents got to know her and Sarah as individuals rather than symbols, slowly breaking down barriers through proximity and persistence. And many parents came around, realizing that Emma and Sarah were just like them, worried about homework and screen time, and whether their kids were eating enough vegetables, that their concerns and hopes for their children were universal, that love looked the same regardless of the gender of the parents, and gradually their family became just another family in the school community, invited to playdates, and included in group texts about Spirit Week and science fair projects. Sarah's work as a child psychologist gave her unique insights into how children of LGBTQ parents developed, and she conducted research that consistently showed these children were just as well adjusted as their peers, sometimes even showing greater empathy and tolerance for difference, better critical thinking skills from having to navigate complex social situations, stronger family bonds from facing external challenges together. And she presented this research at conferences and school board meetings using data to combat fear and misinformation, showing that the only disadvantage these children faced came from discrimination, not from their family structure, that when protected from prejudice, they thrived just like any other children. The twins excelled in school, Maya showing an early aptitude for mathematics and science, spending hours building elaborate structures with blocks and later Legos, asking for books about engineering and architecture for her birthday, while Zoe gravitated toward literature and art, writing stories about families of all kinds, going on adventures, drawing pictures that celebrated diversity in all its forms. Both girls confident in their interests, without gendered limitations, raised by parents who had fought too hard to be themselves, to impose arbitrary restrictions on their daughters who wanted them to explore every possibility without shame or fear. The first time the girls experienced real discrimination was in second grade, when a substitute teacher refused to call Sarah for permission for a field trip, insisting on contacting a male guardian instead. And Emma had to leave her own classroom to deal with the situation, her anger carefully controlled as she educated the substitute about legal realities and basic respect. But that night, she cried in Sarah's arms about the unfairness of it all, about how their 7-year-olds had to witness their family being dismissed as less than about the exhaustion of constantly having to prove their legitimacy. And Sarah held her and reminded her of all the teachers who did support them, all the classmates who thought having two moms was cool, all the progress that had been made, even if the path was still imperfect. They decided to be more proactive about education, creating a presentation about different family structures that they offered to give in classrooms using age-appropriate language and colourful pictures to show that families came in all forms, that what mattered was love and care and support. And many teachers welcomed this resource, grateful for help in navigating conversations about diversity, and the twins beamed with pride watching their mums teach their classmates, seeing their family validated and celebrated in the classroom. Understanding that visibility mattered, that their mums were not just protecting them, but making the path easier for other children with LGBTQ parents. The move to a new school district in 4th grade, when Sarah got a better job offer, meant starting over with advocacy, but that they were veterans now, knowing which battles to fight and which to let go, how to identify allies quickly, how to protect their daughters while also letting them develop their own voices, and the twins had grown into eloquent advocates for themselves, calmly explaining their family to curious classmates, correcting misinformation with facts showing by example that having 2 moms was just one of many ways to be a family. Their confidence a testament to being raised with pride rather than shame. Maya's science fair project on diverse family structures in the animal kingdom became a turning point, her research showing that same-sex pairs existed throughout nature, that adoption and communal child-rearing were common survival strategies, that the nuclear family was just one of many successful models. And when she presented her findings to judges and fellow students, she did so with the authority of someone who had lived experience, to back up her research answering questions with poise and scientific accuracy, winning first place and having her project featured in the district newsletter. A victory that felt bigger than just academic achievement. Zoe's essay about her family for a writing contest brought tears to Emma's eyes. Her daughter, writing with such love and pride about how her mums had chosen each other and chosen Maya and Zoe, how their family was built on intention and dedication. How having 2 moms meant double the love and support, double the help with homework and attendance at school events, double the examples of strong women navigating the world, and when the essay won and was published in the local paper, it sparked conversations throughout the community about what family really meant, about how children understood love in ways that adults sometimes complicated. The invitation to speak at the state capitol about a bill that would protect LGBTQ families came when the twins were in 6th grade, old enough to understand the political implications, to feel the weight of being representatives for families like theirs, and they testified alongside their moms, speaking truth to power about their lives, about their dreams of becoming a scientist and a writer, about how discrimination against their family hurt them directly, about how they just wanted the same protections and opportunities as their classmates, and watching her daughters advocate for themselves and others with such grace and conviction. Emma felt the full circle of her journey, from a terrified teenager to a proud mother raising the next generation of changemakers. High school brought new challenges as the twins navigated adolescence in a world that was increasingly polarized about LGBTQ rights, but they had been prepared by years of open communication and modeling of healthy relationships, comfortable in their identities as daughters of lesbians, proud of their family, while also being normal teenagers, worried about grades and friendships and college applications. And when Maya started dating a boy from her robotics team, and Zoe came out as bisexual, both girls knew they would be supported unconditionally, that their parents had fought too hard for the right to love to ever limit their daughters' choices. The college application process became another opportunity for advocacy as the twins wrote essays about growing up with 2 moms, about how it had shaped their worldviews and career aspirations. Maya, writing about how watching her parents navigate discrimination had inspired her to pursue civil rights law alongside her engineering degree. Zoe describing how being raised in a home that celebrated difference had influenced her desire to become a teacher and writer, amplifying marginalized voices, both girls receiving acceptance letters from top universities that valued their unique perspectives and experiences. Sarah's longitudinal study, following children of LGBTQ parents into adulthood, was published in a prestigious journal, providing data that these children were not just surviving, but thriving, showing higher rates of tolerance and civic engagement, strong family relationships that continued into adulthood, successful careers and relationships of their own, and Emma watched with pride as Sarah presented these findings at conferences and policy meetings, using science to combat prejudice, proving what they had always known in their hearts, that love made a family, that children needed acceptance and support, regardless of their parents' gender, that the future was bright for families like theirs. The wedding planning began when Maya got engaged to her college sweetheart, a young man who had been welcomed into their family with open arms, who understood and celebrated Maya's upbringing, who asked both Emma and Sarah for their blessing. Before proposing, and as they planned the celebration, Emma reflected on how this moment would have been impossible when she was young, illegal for her and Sarah to marry, unimaginable, that their daughter would grow up to have choices Emma had never dreamed of, that she could celebrate her love openly with her family, fully included and recognized. Zoe's first published novel, a young adult story about a girl with two dads navigating high school while solving mysteries, became a bestseller, resonating with LGBTQ families who rarely saw themselves represented in literature, with straight families who learned through the engaging story, with young people who just wanted to read about characters they could relate to. And at the book launch, Zoe thanked her moms for showing her that stories mattered, that representation could change hearts and minds, that living authentically was its own form of activism, that the personal was always political when your existence challenged norms. Becoming grandparents brought another layer of joy and reflection. Maya and her husband choosing to have children through the same fertility clinic that had helped Emma and Sarah, the continuation of their family through chosen paths rather than accident, and holding their grandson. For the first time, Emma thought about the world he would grow up in. How much had changed since she was rejected by her parents for being gay. How he would have 4 grandparents who loved him unconditionally. How his normal would include families of all configurations. How the work of previous generations had created possibilities that once seemed impossible. The school board meeting where Emma now stood was about protecting those possibilities, about ensuring that children, like her grandson, could learn about all kinds of families, that children with LGBTQ parents could see themselves reflected in curricula and library books, that teachers could acknowledge and celebrate diverse families without fear of retribution. And as she began to speak, she saw her daughters in the audience, now adults who had come to support not just their mother, but the principle she was defending, their presence, a living testament to the success of children raised by same-sex couples. Her speech was personal and powerful, sharing the journey from rejection to acceptance, from isolation to community, from fear to pride, explaining how her daughters had grown into compassionate, successful adults, not despite having 2 mothers, but because of it, how they had learned resilience and empathy and justice from navigating a world that sometimes questioned their family, how they had developed critical thinking skills from having to examine societal assumptions, how they had built strong family bonds from facing challenges together, how they were now contributing to society as a lawyer fighting for civil rights and an author creating windows and mirrors for young readers. She spoke about the research, the decades of studies showing that children of LGBTQ parents were just as healthy and happy as their peers, that the only negative outcomes came from discrimination and prejudice, that protecting these families was not about special rights, but equal rights, about ensuring that all children could learn and grow without shame about their families, that all parents could participate fully in their children's education without fear of judgment or exclusion, that the future depended on embracing rather than fearing diversity. The hostile questions from certain audience members were expected, the same tired arguments about tradition and nature and protecting children, and Emma responded with patience and facts, sharing stories of her daughters' achievements, of the families they had built, of the contributions they made to their communities, refusing to be baited into anger, understanding that her composure and dignity were their own arguments, that living well and raising successful children was the best response to those who claimed LGBTQ parents were harmful, that her family's existence and thriving was evidence that could not be denied. When Maya stood to speak, Emma felt the power of generational change, her daughter addressing the board with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her worth, who had been raised to use her voice, who understood that her privilege of having supportive parents came with a responsibility to advocate for others. And Maya spoke about her childhood, about how having two moms had given her unique strengths, about how she had learned to evaluate arguments based on logic rather than tradition, how she had developed empathy for anyone who was marginalized, how she had grown up, understanding that love came in many forms and that all were valid. Zoe followed reading excerpts from letters she had received from young people who had found hope in her books, who had seen their families reflected for the first time, who had shared her stories with parents, struggling to understand LGBTQ issues, demonstrating the power of representation to change hearts and minds, to build bridges between generations and communities, to create the visibility that she had longed for as a child. And her voice was strong and clear as she challenged the board to consider what messages they wanted to send to all children about whose families mattered. The vote was close, but positive, the board choosing to maintain inclusive policies and materials, recognizing that education meant preparing children for the diverse world they lived in, that hiding the existence of LGBTQ families served no one, that children with same-sex parents deserved to see themselves reflected just as much as anyone else. And as Emma hugged her daughters afterward, she thought about all the families who would benefit from this decision, all the children who would grow up feeling seen and valued, all the parents who could participate fully in their children's education. The drive home was filled with reflection on how far they had come from Emma's terrified first kiss to this moment of 3 generations of women advocating together for justice, the twins sharing stories of their own activism in college and beyond, the ripple effects of being raised to use their voices to stand up for what was right, to understand that visibility and vulnerability were forms of strength, that their family's story could help others find their own paths to authenticity and acceptance, that the work was ongoing, but the trajectory was toward justice. Sarah was waiting at home with champagne and the grandson who ran to his grandmother's and aunt with the pure joy of a child who had never known anything but love, who would grow up in a world where his family was increasingly recognized and protected, where he could talk about his grandmothers at school without confusion or shame, where books showing families like his would be available in libraries, where his normal would be broader and more inclusive than any previous generation had experienced. And they celebrated not just the victory, but the journey, the family they had built against odds, the future they were creating together. Emma's journal entry that night reflected on the scared teenager. She had been alone and convinced she would never have a family, never be accepted, never find happiness, and how wrong she had been. How the very thing that had made her different had led her to Sarah, to their daughters, to a life of purpose and meaning, to this moment of advocacy and triumph. And she wrote a message to young LGBTQ people still in hiding, still afraid telling them that it got better, that families like hers were not just possible but thriving, that the future was bright with possibility, that their authenticity would lead them to lives beyond their wildest dreams. The speaking invitations poured in after the board meeting requests for Emma and her family to share their story at conferences and schools and churches to help other communities navigate similar challenges, to provide the representation and education that could change hearts and minds. And they accepted, selectively, understanding that their visibility was a form of service, that every person who heard their story and saw their success might reconsider their assumptions about LGBTQ families, might support a child who came out, might vote for equality, might become an ally in the ongoing fight for justice. Maya's law practice specialized in family law for LGBTQ clients, helping couples navigate adoption and surrogacy fighting for parental rights, ensuring that families like hers were protected legally, and she often called Emma for advice on particularly challenging cases, the two of them strategizing about how to present LGBTQ families to skeptical judges, how to use data, and stories to humanize their clients, how to build on the progress that had been made while acknowledging how much work remained. And Emma felt the continuity of their activism, the passing of torches between generations, the sustained effort required for lasting change. Zoe's school visits as an author became opportunities for education reading to children from her books featuring diverse families, answering questions with the same patience Emma had shown decades earlier, planting seeds of acceptance in young minds. And she reported back about the changes she saw, how more children had LGBTQ parents or family members, how teachers were better prepared to discuss family diversity, how her books were creating conversations between parents and children about love and acceptance, how representation was slowly but surely changing the landscape for families like theirs. The research center Sarah established focused on studying resilience in children of marginalized families, expanding beyond LGBTQ families to include all kinds of diversity, understanding that the strategies these children developed for navigating difference could benefit everyone, that studying strength rather than deficit changed the entire conversation, that highlighting success stories alongside addressing challenges created a more complete picture, and Emma watched with pride as Sarah mentored young researchers, many of them from LGBTQ families themselves, continuing the work of proving what they had always known about love and family. The grandmother role brought new joys and challenges. Emma and Sarah navigating how to support Maya and her husband while respecting their parenting choices, sharing wisdom from their own journey, while acknowledging that the world their grandson was growing up in was different from the one they had navigated. That progress had been made, even as vigilance was still required, and they treasured the ordinary moments, reading bedtime stories, attending school plays, being the grandparents they had wished for their own children, present and supportive and proud of their growing family. The documentary filmmaker who approached them about telling their story for a broader audience sparked long family discussions about privacy and purpose, ultimately deciding that sharing their journey could help other families, could provide hope and strategies and representation, could show that LGBTQ families were not abstract concepts, but real people living full lives, raising children, contributing to communities facing challenges with grace and resilience, and the filming process became its own form of reflection. Each family member sharing their perspective on growing up in or creating an LGBTQ family. The premiere brought together their extended, chosen and biological families, the community that had supported them through decades of change, and watching their story on screen. Emma saw the arc from fear to freedom, from isolation to community, from fighting for basic recognition to advocating for others. And she held Sarah's hand, thinking about all the young people who would see this film, who would recognize their own families or dreams, who would understand that love made a family, that the future was bright for children of LGBTQ parents, that authenticity and courage could create lives of meaning and joy. The questions from the audience after the screening showed how much had changed, and how much hadn't young people asking about strategies for coming out or supporting friends, parents, seeking resources for understanding their LGBTQ children, educators wanting to create more inclusive environments. And Emma and her family answered with the wisdom of lived experience, sharing resources and connections, building bridges between generations and communities, understanding that their story was one of many, but that each story shared made the path easier for others. The legacy Emma contemplated as she watched her grandson play was not just about her individual family, but about all the families that had been made possible by decades of activism, all the children who would grow up taking equality for granted, all the parents who would be able to marry and raise children without fear. And she thought about the responsibility that came with progress, the need to continue pushing for justice to protect gains that could be reversed to ensure that the future remained bright for all families, regardless of configuration, that love in all its forms was celebrated and protected. The final school board meeting of Emma's career before retirement was a celebration, colleagues and community members gathering to honour her decades of service, not just as an educator, but as an advocate and speaker after speaker talked about how she had changed hearts and minds, how her visibility and dignity had made the school safer for all LGBTQ families, how her daughter's success had proven every argument about the welfare of children with same-sex parents, how her family had become an example of what was possible when love was allowed to flourish without restriction, and Emma stood before them one last time, thanking them for the journey, for the growth, for the opportunity to be part of creating a world where families like hers were no longer remarkable, but simply part of the beautiful diversity of human experience. Looking around the room, at 3 generations of her family, at the community that had embraced them, at the young teachers who would carry on the work, Emma felt the profound satisfaction of a life well lived, of choosing love over fear, of building something beautiful, from rejection and pain, of proving that LGBTQ people could not just survive but thrive, could raise children who would change the world, could create families that would endure and multiply and spread love in ever-widening circles, and she knew that the future was indeed bright for children of homosexual couples, that the dialogue would continue, but from a place of strength and evidence and lived experience, that every family like hers made the next one easier, that love would win because it already had in all the ways that mattered most.